Hi, I'm Jeffrey, and this is AutoAlchemy, the intersection between typology and self-growth. Quick question for you. When does an INFP look like an ESFJ? It sounds like a clever joke with a punchline like, after about 2 shots of tequila. But actually, it's serious business. Seriously. Alright folks, so today I'm at it again with another typology compare and contrast, and this week I am looking at the unlikely pairing of INFPs versus ESFJs. I wanted to do this pair for a number of reasons, the primary one being just how far apart these two types seem to be at the most stereotypical level. If we examine pure stereotypes, INFPs, for example, are often portrayed as these tortured artists or these crybaby poets with their heads in the clouds. ESFJs, on the other hand, are often portrayed as overly affectionate helicopter parents or gossipy Karens. And yet, despite this vast chasm between these stereotypes, we can't forget my newfound mantra: the archetype is not the architecture. From a behavioral standpoint, any type can do anything. And spoiler alert, the fact is, there are at least some variants of these types that can look remarkably similar to each other. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Throughout the rest of this video, I'll be using terminology from the objective personality system. I'll do my best to define terms as I go along, but if you want a really thorough understanding of what it is that they're talking about, I highly recommend you check out their website and their YouTube channel. Anyway, let's get started by looking at some similarities between INFPs and ESFJs. The first commonality between these types is that they are both single deciders in the objective personality terminology. This means that they lead with either a thinking or a feeling function. A deciding function is essentially equivalent to a judging function in MBTI/socionics and a rational function by Jung's original definition of the term. A single decider will be more or less balanced when it comes to intuition versus sensing, gathering versus organizing, but they are going to be lopsided when it comes to thinking versus feeling, self versus tribe. They will struggle with that balance of individual significance versus the needs of the collective. So yeah, instead of freaking out about the possibility of us all living in the Matrix, which a single observer like yours truly might do, they are more inclined to go topsy-turvy over more human matters. So just as some examples, they may see a particular individual human being as the source of all of life's suffering. They may get stuck on questions of individual worth. Who's a bully? Who's a narcissist? They may sacrifice themselves too often, or conversely, they may fight the collective at every possible turn. As I said before, the common factor here is that their central life problems will revolve around that imbalance between self and other. The second thing that these two types have in common is that they both have a savior preference for feeling above thinking. In objective personality, a savior is essentially a function or animal that you use calmly and responsibly, especially when you contrast that with how you use the opposite function or the opposite animal. Basically, whenever you are in a savior state, you're in something akin to a flow state, while when you're in a demon state, the use of that particular function is bringing up a lot of fear, a lot of shame, a lot of negative energy. INFPs and ESFJs both will, in their own way, enter the savior state whenever they're engaging with questions of values, whenever they're reflecting on what truly matters. And for each of them, these questions of what truly matters stand independent from questions of logical coherency or logical connectivity. The realm of values does not need to be logically justified or explained. It has a certain self-evident nature to it. Unless these types are well integrated, they're going to see logic as being a convenient afterthought or, at worst, a cold, calculating antagonist. And the final commonality between these two types is their shared observing axis. For those of you who aren't familiar, the observing functions are essentially equivalent to the perceiving functions in standard MBTI, which is the same thing as the irrational functions for Jung. INFPs and ESFJs both will use introverted sensing and extroverted intuition in a fairly even capacity. That is, they will treat abstract patterns in a more expansive, plethoric kind of way, while their approach to sensory reality will be more narrowed, and more organized. This particular similarity is even more applicable for the jumper types in objective personality. These are types that leap over their second function and actually prefer their third function. Against this backdrop of similarities, we can now look at the differences between these two types. The first major difference involves each type's relationship to that earlier question of self versus tribe. In this particular equation, INFPs will be self above tribe, while ESFJs will be tribe above self. This means that INFPs will naturally strive to set themselves apart from other people through their pursuit of values. They seek out a sense of personal significance and have a tendency to despise groupthink, which, by the way, does not mean that they don't care about others. It simply means that they innately understand the value of putting on your own oxygen mask before tending to other people. And the danger of this self above tribe mentality is that the world may turn and leave you behind as you become too obsessively preoccupied with your own projects and passions. Conversely, ESFJs will work hard to prioritize the values of others, sometimes to the point where they do forget to put on their own oxygen mask. They will seek out a sense of interpersonal connection at the expense of honoring their own personal truths, viewing the latter as being somehow self-absorbed. But because they can sometimes neglect the needs of the self, the danger for ESFJs is that their sense of independent identity can erode. The second difference between INFPs and ESFJs is each type's relationship to thinking versus feeling. Each type exists on a different thinking-feeling axis, so the INFPs are on the extroverted thinking, introverted feeling axis, and the ESFJs are on the introverted thinking, extroverted feeling axis. So for INFPs, values are a personal thing, while logic and rationale is seen as being more communal, more distributed across a collective. And for ESFJs, values are more communal, they are more other-oriented, and logic is a deeply personal, introverted kind of process. I like to think of these differences in terms of embodied mantras, words that you could use to describe the way that a type is embodying its preferences out in the world. INFPs live out this mantra: I have to follow what matters to me, regardless of whether it works for others or makes sense to them. ESFJs will embody this: I have to honor what matters to others, regardless of whether it makes any sense to me. The final difference between these two types is that they have different animal distributions, which can really help you to puzzle out your type if you think you're torn between the two. And at this particular juncture, I should probably offer a quick primer in what the objective personality animals are. In OP, an animal is a combination of functions, particularly a decider function and an observer function, working together to accomplish some essential work of being human. Just like the functions, animals come in pairs, so a person will have a savior preference for one half of that pair, and they will reject the other half as a demon. The information animals consist of consume and blast, while the energy animals consist of play and sleep. Someone who is savior, consume, demon, blast will compulsively seek out new information as a way of answering their questions, but then they will be very slow to actually apply that information in any organized way to put it out in the world. Those who are savior, blast, demon, consume will have the opposite problem. They don't really have difficulties getting started and applying information. Instead, they might crash because they realize they didn't know as much as they thought they knew, and now they're resistant to updating their models of reality. Someone who is savior, play, demon, sleep will easily seek out connection and variety amongst other humans, while sometimes losing sight of their own energetic boundaries and knowing what their limits are. On the other hand, someone who is savior, sleep, demon, play might just say, F the world. They will reject the chaos of human interaction and instead choose to preserve their own energy and to rework and revisit their own inner worlds. Great, so how can these animal stacks help us differentiate between INFPs and ESFJs? Well, if we ignore the topic of sexual modalities, objective personality gives us 8 basic versions of each type. Here are the INFPs and ESFJs. So keeping in mind the concept of savior state versus demon state, let's say that you determine that you are savior consume, demon blast. As you can see here, 75% of the INFPs are consumers, while only 25% of ESFJs are. Additionally, the ESFJs who do prefer consume prefer NE over SI, making them, by necessity, play leads. So what this means is if you are an ESFJ, you will never simultaneously prefer consume above blast and sleep above play. And these little elimination moves can actually help you puzzle out your type. With blast above consume, we have the opposite problem. 75% of ESFJs are blasters, while only 25% of INFPs are blasters. And the only INFPs who prefer blast above consume will necessarily be lead sleep. So the point here is that no INFP will prefer both blast above consume and play above sleep. These same patterns work out with the energy animals, play and sleep. So now we can circle back to the question that I posed at the beginning of this video. When does an INFP look like an ESFJ? Thanks to the animal stacks, we can actually answer this question with more than just a punchline. We end up with these overlapping distributions of types. So the outliers of one curve intersect with the outliers of the other. The types on screen are just one binary preference away from each other and are similar in all other typological dimensions. The consume, play, blast, sleep INFPs will be more extroverted than the tortured artists of our cherished stereotypes, while the blast, sleep, consume, play ESFJs will have quite the inner life compared to the memeified Karen in your head. And this all goes to showcase one of my favorite things about the objective personality system. It allows for these really interesting intersections of type. Maybe you'll get something out of it if you're somebody who has struggled to situate yourself within the conventional models of type. In any case, I hope that you found this video helpful or interesting, and as always, I thank you guys for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next time.